This week in MMA news, UFC 319 payout information has been released, including all fighter salaries and bonuses. New middleweight champion Khamzat Chimaev, former champ Dricus Du Plessis, and their teammates, friends, and family share their reactions and feelings. All payout information for UFC 319 has been released to the press. We'll take an in-depth look at fighter pay and how the new Paramount deal may help up-and-coming athletes. And Sean Strickland has received a 6-month suspension from the Nevada State Athletic Commission following behavior unbecoming of, well, an adult. All this and more MMA and UFC news after I say thank you for watching My Fitness Fight, the channel where we stand shoulder to shoulder to battle our demons and share memes along the way. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, like the video if you enjoy this content, or dislike it if you think it's terrible. I appreciate you watching. Let's get back to the news. The aftermath of UFC 319 has created a number of interesting stories, one of which, as always, is the balance of fighter payouts, who earned how much and why. Dricus Du Plessis was the top earner of UFC 319 with an estimated $3.8 million, while newly crowned middleweight champion Khamzat Chimaev earned an estimated $2.68 million. These figures include their base pay, win bonuses, and an estimated percentage of pay-per-view revenue. Khamzat's payout includes a $50,000 Performance of the Night bonus, and $50,000 bonuses were also earned by Lerone Murphy, Carlos Prates, and Tim Elliott, the three main card fighters who finished their opponents. Now let's take a closer look at some of the payouts. You can see Dricus and Khamzat there at the top, and just keep in mind that these are all estimates based on information made available to the press. We have Lerone Murphy earning $1,270,000, Aaron Pico earning $715,000, Edson Barboza earned $421,000, Tim Elliott also earned $421,000. Michael Page earned $410,000. Jared Cannonier earned $371,000. Gerald Meerschaert also earned $371,000. Jessica Andrade took home $346,000. And skipping down to the bottom now so I don't bore you too much, the bottom three payouts were for Baysanger Sisirkaev at $28,000 and Alibi Idris and Eric Nolan at $16,000 each. Now, I know that a lot of people like to talk about the disparity in fighter pay and how it's unfair and how the UFC needs to do better and pay entry-level fighters more, but I'm not going to do that because I am not a communist. The only way that I think the UFC should be paying more to their entry-level fighters is if they're paying less than those fighters could be earning at smaller competitions. Now, there are benefits to fighting for the UFC. There are ways in which fighters benefit just by being included in a UFC event. However, in my opinion, that doesn't mean that the UFC should be paying them less than smaller competition. Unfortunately, it's extremely difficult to get a good idea of what other MMA promotions are paying because most of them do not disclose that information. I would like to see the UFC give entry-level fighters more opportunities to earn more money. Listen carefully to what I'm saying here. I'm not saying that the UFC should have minimum payouts, and I'm definitely not saying that the UFC should take some money away from their highest paid athletes and give it to their lowest paid athletes. Anytime that you introduce a non-merit based system like that, it incentivizes people to exploit that non-merit based system instead of developing the merit to succeed. And this is going to be especially damaging in a highly competitive environment like the UFC. In order to be a very successful MMA fighter, you need to win fights and you need to be interesting to the fans. And one of the ways that I think the UFC could help their less known fighters earn more is by providing them with some media training. And it's possible that they already do this to some extent, but I've never heard of it. And for a lot of athletes, even just giving them a few pointers and walking them through how things are going to go when they're in the public eye and when they're in front of the press, and kind of giving them an idea of what to expect and how to bring the best version of themselves to that environment could be really, really helpful for a lot of people. And that would cost the UFC a little bit of money, but it would actually be an investment in their own business because if their fighters are better at endearing themselves to fans and becoming popular, it's only going to benefit the company. Another way that the UFC could give entry-level fighters more opportunities to earn, so I'm not saying give them more money, I'm saying give them more opportunities to earn more, give them more opportunities to be more valuable to the company. And one way that they could do that is with some sort of a fight commission for undercard fights. And I chose the word commission kind of at random. You could call it a lot of different things, but the idea would be that you get a bonus as an undercard fighter if you accomplish one of a list of things that tends to make an interesting fight. So for example, if base pay for undercard fighters is 16 grand right now, then they could also say, in addition to that, if you finish your opponent, so if you win by knockout or submission on the undercard, then you get an extra 4 grand automatically. Okay. And the reason that this is different than just bumping the base pay up to 20 grand is that now undercard fighters have extra motivation to try to stand out, to try to deliver a really compelling performance, which is really something that undercard fighters should be doing anyways, because even if you don't win, putting on a really compelling performance in one of your first UFC fights is how you get more UFC fights. That's how fans start to find you. I can think of so many examples of times where a random undercard bout between two guys who were previously pretty much unknown outshone the main event because people thought the main event was boring. On this occasion, a lot of people thought the main event of UFC 319 was boring. And the two fights that really stole the show were the two spinning elbow knockouts that were both on the main card. But there were a lot of finishes on the undercard as well. And so the more the UFC can help to incentivize their fighters to really leave it all in the octagon, the better. And that would just be an easy way that they could staple an extra $4,000 to those low-level fighter payouts based on performance. You could also have other commissions, such as if you win by decision, but you have at least 30% more than the average significant strikes or takedowns, then you also get the bonus. You could also say if you lose, but you land the same number of significant strikes or more than your opponent, in other words, if you fought really hard and gave as good as you got, then you also get the commission. So you could attach this conditional bonus where if you accomplish certain things in your fight, you get paid more. And all that it would do is it would give fighters extra motivation to perform as best they can. It would give fans something else to talk about and something to get excited about. And it would give the UFC an actual business reason to increase that money. The UFC could also have one or more smaller performance of the night bonuses that are only for the undercard. Because in this case, there were 4 $50,000 performance of the night bonuses handed out, and they were given to Khamzat, who won the main event and became the middleweight champion, and the other 3 were given to the 3 main card winners who finished their opponents, 2 knockouts, 1 submission. And I think it's pretty rare for undercard fighters to get those bonuses, because generally the performance bonuses are going to main card fighters who perform really well. So another idea would be to have one or more performance of the night bonuses, potentially smaller ones, that are set aside for undercard fighters. And that doesn't mean that you would have to give them to someone on the undercard. If no one performs well, don't give it to anyone. But that way, undercard fighters wouldn't feel like they're performing, putting on a highlight reel, and then not getting the bonus because someone who's on the main card also performed well. I think that could be really interesting. You could also do something with an undercard bonus that is voted on by the fans. Again, that would be a really good way to increase fan engagement, to give fans something else to talk about, another reason to interact with the brand on social media, and again, another real business reason for the UFC to increase those low-level payouts. I don't think the UFC should pay entry-level fighters more or should be required to, but I would love to see them create more opportunities for entry-level fighters to earn more and to help them thrive into their career as they grow, because there are a lot of pitfalls and difficulties that professional athletes face, especially MMA fighters, and the UFC obviously has the wisdom and experience to help them deal with those. So that is something I would like to see. Moving on to our next top story, Sean Strickland has been suspended for 6 months by the Nevada State Athletic Commission for attacking another MMA fighter at a different promotion's event. On June 29th, 2025, Strickland was at a Tough Enough event where he was cornering a teammate. Following his teammate's loss to Luis Hernandez, Strickland entered the cage and punched the winning fighter after Hernandez simulated self-stimulation and then invited Strickland to orally assist him via gesture. Strickland stormed into the cage like a mom who smells cannabis in her teenage son's room and threw two poorly aimed punches that really didn't do anything at all, other than provoke the Athletic Commission to suspend him. The 6-month suspension is retroactive to the date of the incident, meaning the 6 months starts back in June, and includes a $5,000 fine. The suspension may be reduced to 4.5 months if Strickland completes a commission-approved anger management program. Nevada State Athletic Commission Chairman Dallas Hahn publicly praised Strickland for cooperating. This means Strickland will be ineligible to fight until December 29, and this actually got me thinking about the story I covered a couple days ago, which featured Sean Strickland being called out and challenged to a spar by a popular fitness influencer. And at the time, I was already suspecting that the whole calling him out thing might have been a coordinated plan between the two of them to drum up some social media drama, get them both a lot of attention. And at this point, I'm definitely leaning in the direction of that being the case, because this influencer calling Strickland out and suggesting that the two of them should spar really couldn't have happened at a better time for Strickland. The middleweight belt just changed hands, and no one's really talking about Strickland as the number one contender. People seem to be more focused on Rainier de Ritter, and most people are just really interested in Khamzat and seeing who he wants to fight, seeing who he calls out the most. And so the UFC middleweight division and the UFC attention in general is definitely not on Strickland. And because of the suspension, he's not going to have a fight for at least 5 months, which means it's going to be harder for him to insert himself into the spotlight. And so really the best thing that could happen for his notoriety and for him kind of creating his own alternate spotlight is something like this, is having a big social media influencer call him out, say all those ridiculous things that he said, and create kind of a sideshow that is relevant to him being a fighter, but that isn't contingent on his ranking as a UFC middleweight. So obviously it's possible that this is just something that the influencer was doing on his own, or that there's some legitimate beef there. But it does seem interesting that this call-out happened at pretty much the best possible time for Strickland's career. In other MMA news, the PFL, or Professional Fighters League, crowned its 2025 World Tournament champions in the heavyweight, light heavyweight, and middleweight divisions at the Seminole Hard Rock Hotel and Casino in Hollywood, Florida. Fabian Edwards won the middleweight title in a highlight reel finish, defeating Dalton Rasta by third-round KO with a head kick reminiscent of his brother, UFC standout Leon Edwards. Oleg Popov claimed the heavyweight title, earning a split decision victory over Alexander Romanov in a grueling 5-round battle, and Antonio Carlos Jr. became the light heavyweight champion, submitting Sullivan Cauley with a rear naked choke in the second round. And a point of interest about UFC Fight Night 257, taking place this weekend in China, Brian Ortega and Aljamain Sterling were scheduled for a featherweight bout at 145 pounds as the co-main event, but this has reportedly been changed to a catchweight fight at 153 pounds after both fighters failed to make weight and weighed in at 153 pounds. Now, I have to say, it's kind of crazy that they both weighed in that much above the limit and that they both weighed in at the same amount. I do want to give them a little bit of grace here because I've been told that fighting on the other side of the world makes everything, including the weight cut, much more difficult. However, I believe Brian Ortega has had weight cut issues in the past at 145, and I believe Aljamain Sterling recently moved up from bantamweight at 135 because he was having weight cut issues down there. It might not have been this bad if they weren't doing this on the other side of the world from where they're used to being. But at the same time, missing weight by 8 pounds is crazy. And I think they both need to think about some body recomposition. And in Ortega's case, possibly moving up to lightweight, because Aljamain Sterling is only 5'7", and he used to make 135. So I would think that once he settles in at featherweight, he should be okay making 145, especially when he's not in China. But Brian Ortega has had issues with making featherweight in the past, and he is 5'9", which is definitely tall for a featherweight. Conor McGregor fought at featherweight in and out of the UFC, and was even the UFC featherweight champion briefly before moving up to lightweight. And McGregor was always thought of as a big featherweight who is much more natural at 155 pounds, and he's only 5'8". So Brian Ortega is a full inch taller than McGregor, and he's trying to fight at a weight class which is 10 pounds lighter than the weight class that Conor looked the most natural at. And you can see Ortega is a pretty cut guy. He's not carrying a lot of muscle. He has almost no body fat on him. And since he's struggled in the past with these weight cuts, I think he needs to consider moving up a weight class, or at the very least, finding a new approach to his nutrition and to whatever else he's doing to keep his weight in check and to make sure that he makes weight. Because for most professional fighters, making weight is a scientific process. There's like a 0% chance for most professional fighters that they miss weight. The guys who miss weight tend to do it again and again and again, like Ortega, and it's almost always either because they're fighting at the wrong weight class or because they don't have the right nutrition program or some combination of the two. So I really hope that he can get that in order and have a healthier career going forward, because it is not good for you to be cutting that much weight and trying to force yourself to dehydrate down to a level that's just not natural for you. But I hope that Sterling and Ortega are both able to show up for the fight healthy and put on a good performance, and that they take a bit more care with their weight going forward. And I'll end it there for today. Thank you for watching. Please like the video with the accuracy of Conor McGregor's left-hand shot, and subscribe to the channel with as much commitment as Sean Strickland gives to his emotional outbursts. And as always, share the video with a friend so that they can remind you to come back and watch the next one.